You know how politicians are sometimes criticised and people go, "Oh, you muppet, why did you say that?"
Yes.
You know that phrase du jour at the moment, lean in. Well, Boris Johnson sort of lent into that by actually quoting the Muppets when he was at, I can't believe I'm saying this, the United Nations General Assembly. Here's how it went.
When Kermit the Frog sang, "It's not easy being green." You remember that one? I want you to know that he was wrong. He was wrong. It is easy. It's not only easy, it's lucrative and it's right to be green. He was also unnecessarily rude to Miss Piggy, I thought, Kermit the Frog.
Do you remember that one? It wasn't met with an overwhelming wall of noise.
Well, you have to also remember at the United Nations meetings, lots of the very august world leaders who are sitting there have got simultaneous translation. Yeah. And the next sentence then went on to talk about Sophocles. And I just kind of wonder, you know that phrase, read the room?
Yeah.
While making a speech. And the central message of the speech was, world, grow up. Climate change is here. It's real. It's dangerous. You have to do more. Grow up. Here's a gag about Kermit.
Yeah. I wonder if Kermit's
I
ever
nearly
featured
put those things on the table.
I wonder if Kermit's ever featured at an UNGA, a UN General Assembly, before.
Well, BTS were there, so it was all a weird mixture. But anyway, so...
the Korean boy band, for those who aren't familiar with their oeuvre, Adam.
So what's interesting, though, I had a bit of time this afternoon, and you know I always like to go back to the original text of things.
Oh, you love a document.
So I went to the original lyrics of Being Green, the Kermit the Frog song.
Oh, wow.
And actually, I think Boris Johnson may be slightly guilty of selective quotation. So the song starts off with Kermit saying it's not easy being green, but by the end, he said, but green's the colour of spring, and green can be cool and friendly like, and green can be big like an ocean, or important like a mountain, or tall like a tree. When green is all there is to be, it would make you wonder why, but why wonder, why wonder? I'm green, and it'll do fine. It's beautiful, and I think it's what I want to be.
Go
See,
Kermit,
at this
go
point,
green.
I'm thinking, I haven't had very much sleep and I'm not sure this is really happening. Is it really happening?
Next week, we'll be discussing the meaning of the rainbow connection. Hopefully Keir Starmer will be putting that in his conference speech. More high-quality textual analysis on this edition of Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Adam in the studio.
And Laura in the same studio, and we are still 2 metres apart.
And Chris in the booth of news, having elbowed John Whittingdale and Adam out of my chair.
Although, Laura, you say we're 2 metres apart, we've literally been an ocean apart this week.
Oh, so smooth.
And people listening to the podcast edition of Newscast earlier this week would have heard our budget remake of Planes, Trains and Automobiles as you tried to make a news programme on a train with Boris Johnson
How nostalgic
and Liz Truss.
it felt.
And there's this great bit where it's like I could almost see Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, the new Foreign Secretary, like carrying their bags past you, going, "Excuse me," and
well, that's sort of what was happening. But I had wheelie cases as well, and I was trying to get off the train with wheelie cases and kind of get out of the way because Boris Johnson was walking down the platform. Yeah, it was redolent of some of our more chaotic days of trying to cover Brexit from different countries.
When you got back on the plane, and I'm sure like maybe a little drink was served, do you think the number 10 lot looked really pleased with how it had gone?
Yes, Downing Street believed that this was a really good, if kind of frantic trip for them for a couple of reasons. I think the biggest reason is that they got President Biden to put his hand in his pocket to double his promise of Wonga for the $100 billion target for the COP26 climate conference in Glasgow. That sounds very, very complicated, but a massive priority at the moment is for the UK government to be getting countries around the world to say, we will give more cash to developing countries in time for that big conference in November. President Biden came to the wicket this week, and when we were on the plane on the way over, Downing Street was not expecting that to happen. So that was a big win for them, and they hope it will unlock actions for lots of other countries. Other things they're pleased about, lifting of the travel ban from next month, from November. So Brits, like people from other European countries, but double jab Brits will be able to go backwards and forwards. And they were also pleased with the discussions around security and the new pact with Australia and all those kinds of things. But I think more than anything else, there was a sense for the number 10 team that, you know, Joe Biden and Boris Johnson are not necessarily logically, politically going to be mates. But I think they felt actually this time that they had sort of deepened their understanding and their bond, and actually showed that they could do business together. They can get things done. And I think also they were able to fill in some of the blanks of the kind of global Britain thing, where people quite often go, huh, what does that mean? And they've got things they can point to this week.
I was going to ask you about that, Laura, because there's inevitably after these kind of shindigs, there's a chalking up of wins and things that weren't quite won, and there was the stuff about Lamb, wasn't there, versus not getting a trade deal anytime soon. But as you say, so much of geopolitics is about individuals and how well individuals get on regardless of political differences, and they've had very little time in recent years to spend time physically in each other's presence, and obviously Joe Biden's relatively new in office, and so that kind of immeasurable human thing actually matters, even if you can't quite, as I say, measure it.
That's right. And I think, I don't think they're not going to kind of go down in history as, two of the great transatlantic partnerships of sort of Thatcher and Reagan, or Churchill and FDR. Yeah.
Blair and Bush and Colgate.
Right. But they're, they are both pragmatic politicians. And being in the Oval Office, I get to say that, being in the Oval Office,
very blue
where they were sitting next to each other, and we were all kind of packed in there. They were so it was easy in each other's company, and the UK side certainly felt that their meeting had gone really well. They thought it went really, really well. It was very, very friendly in tone. Although I think the Prime Minister did look a bit bemused when Joe Biden was telling his very long anecdote about trains.
Longer than the train journey when I watched it back.
Yeah, but even that was interesting because, you see, Boris Johnson had joked on the way over, well, Joe Biden's a train nut like me. Maybe we can bond over trains. And then, lo and behold, in the Oval Office, the first thing Joe Biden does is tell a story about Amtrak. So, and that sounds kind of completely random. But actually, that's a little bit of sort of diplomatic cuteness there, isn't it? Being woven in. And as ever, though, America sort of gave the UK, just enough, just enough. Here's some bits and pieces. We show we can do business together. This is all looking pretty good. But it was also very, very plain, that long-promised trade deal that Donald Trump used to say was going to happen, Boris Johnson promised lots of times was going to happen. It is just way, 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 way down the priority list for the Biden White House right now. And it's not a surprise, but my goodness, it became really, really clear this week.
There were a few things, though, where as an observer on the other side of the Atlantic, I was a little bit confused. So, for example, Boris Johnson was asked, did the Northern Ireland Protocol and the Brexit deal come up in your discussion with Biden in the White House? And they were there for about 90 minutes once the cameras had gone. But then you read the readout from the White House, the little statement they put out, the summary of what the two men discussed. And the last sentence says they discussed Northern Ireland.
And the UK official readout also said that they discussed Northern Ireland. Wow. So we had 3 different accounts of what actually happened. Now,
2 of which came from number 10 Downing Street.
Yes, but because of this, I asked a couple of other people who were in the room, who were not either Boris Johnson or Joe Biden or the people sending out the official readout. So this is apparently what I've been able to piece together. When we were in the room, Joe Biden talked about the protocol, but he talked about protocol plurals, and it wasn't really clear if he was talking about the Good Friday Agreement or the tensions with the European Union. What apparently happened when the reporters left the room and the talks carried on is an official said, President Biden, do you want to have another big conversation about this? Do we want to, have this in the meeting? And he said, no, we've mentioned that when the press were here. And that was basically it.
I see.
So it was not as, an official, a relatively sort of impartial person who was in the room explained. It was not something that was not mentioned at all, but it was not substantively discussed, which is why there are these varying accounts of it out there.
Okay. And another thing that was slightly confusing for me as an observer, you had Boris Johnson saying, me and Joe Biden talked about how astonished we were at Emmanuel Macron's annoyance at the new UK-US-Australia submarine pact, which was basically done at the expense of an existing French deal. But then a few hours after that, Joe Biden puts out a joint statement with Emmanuel Macron saying, we acknowledge this whole process could maybe have been handled better if we'd shared more information with you. How do those two things reconcile?
Well, those two things can be true, right? So I think Boris Johnson and Joe Biden, so the US and the UK, were both surprised at how the French took it. They were surprised at the sort of level of outrage. What also emerged during their talks, I understand, is that they both kind of said, wasn't Scott Scott Morrison. Wasn't he meant to tell them? He told us he was going to tell the French. But they also agreed, well, hang on a minute, France is an important ally, so we kind of, we didn't think they were going to be that cross, but we do need to try to kind of sort this out because nobody wants to fall out. So lo and behold, OK, the French ambassador goes back to Washington, Biden makes up to Macron. So I think, there is a kind of, was the announcement of this really what it should be? But also it was being suggested in my earshot that some of the French outrage might have been to try to jack up the level of compensation that they may get, just suggested by somebody in a position of influence, shall we say?
I love the oldest excuse in the book. Oh, I thought you were going to call the French president. Oh, it was meant to be me. Oh, God.
But it is at the end of the day. I mean, that issue around the contract between Australia and France, that is that was a matter for those two. But don't forget, also for the US and particularly the UK, there are lots and lots of security and military cooperation, and it is kind of a big deal that they didn't know. And in quite a revealing way, I think we asked Boris Johnson about this on the train yesterday, and one of my colleagues in the lobby said, "But come on, you must understand why he had a right to be a bit sore." And he said, well, it's human nature to put off, those really hard conversations, isn't it? Surely you lot all know that from your emotional lives. You put it off until the last minute. And it was
that's very revealing. And almost
a bit hard to know where to look. And leading to, I think, the Mail splash on said, Boris suggests Emmanuel Macron's a jilted lover. It was one of these... It was the end of a very long few days. And I thought, well, that's rather a revealing quote.
Well, I love hearing about the diplomatic behind the scenes so much I keep hitting my microphone in excitement. Also, I did just think that UN speech when Boris Johnson talks about leaving your irresponsible years behind you and starting to act like a grown-up, I was like, who could he possibly be talking about?
Well, the other thing was there was a sort of passage about getting away with it and then thinking... you could just keep getting away with it because you got away with it to start with, which pointed some Labour wags on Twitter to say, oh, he's talking about himself again.
Yeah. And of course, when you go across the Atlantic, you, of course, get chased by British news the whole time. And the big British news this week was the cost of living and particularly what is going on with people's energy bills, which you tackled Boris Johnson about on what looks like the very top of a skyscraper.
If you look at our 10-point plan
for the Green Industrial Revolution... Forgive me, Prime Minister, I think at the moment people would like to know how they're going to put food on the table in the next few weeks and months, rather than thinking about a long-term 10-point plan.
Just on that, Laura, if I may, actually, I don't know quite what you're saying, but I don't believe that people will be short of food, and wages are actually rising now under this government, if that's what you're driving at.
Prices are rising
under this government
Prime Minister,
for the first time in decades,
Prime Minister,
and that is a great thing.
That Sex and the City remake, not quite what I was expecting. Much more kind of political content.
Yeah, there were no martinis and no fancy shoes. I did have a new pair of trousers, but it was really interesting. At the beginning of the week, I think Downing Street were in a sort of classic, and this is a very, very beltway point, so forgive me, but I think newscasters are as, perhaps some of you are as nerdy and as sad as we are. I think they were in what I would describe as a real sort of classic trip bubble, where they're in this massive high-profile situation. They've got, White House visit, United Nations, Meanwhile, in a different time zone, there is a huge story of massive public concern running really, really hard, and it takes them kind of a little bit of time to catch up with that. This is a very, very real problem for farmers, for supermarkets potentially, for meat producers, for energy companies going under, for bill payers. This is a really big issue. And, the government, you guys have been here this week. I think they've been struggling to keep up with what to do. Are they going to bail out companies or not? Are they going to prop up some sectors or not? Or are they just going to say, as Boris Johnson said on Monday, the market will fix it. It's a temporary problem. Don't worry about it. Here's my 10-point plan.
It's a massive thing, isn't it? Because as you say, you put together the here and now and all of the headlines of the last week, the broader conversation that's gone on for a few weeks about universal credit and the loss of that £20 a week uplift coming in a couple of weeks' time, alongside those bigger promises about quote-unquote levelling up. This is a huge moment for a government trying to prove it's delivering, encountering reality.
That's right, because if people feel skint and hard up and worried, that is awful for members of the public, of course, and politically, it's very, very uncomfortable. And the government's defence is, look, well, wages are rising, okay, the labour market's really tight, unemployment's low, we want to help people into jobs rather than sort of propping things up. But it's not clear what kind of interventions they're really prepared to make. They did put in a temporary subsidy for forgive me, I can't remember the name, CF they're
Industries,
called.
the people that make fertiliser, of which the byproduct is CO2, which is in literally everything, it turns out.
Yeah, but there's no question, it should not be a surprise to the government that the UK supply chains when it comes to energy are pretty tight.
Now, Laura, how many nights will you get to sleep in your own bed before you have to pack your bag again to go to Brighton for the Labour Party conference?
3.
Oh, that's quite a lot.
Good.
That's more than I was expecting, actually. And yeah, it would be back to a full-on party conference.
Yes, first time in 2 years.
Yeah.
Which is going to be really interesting, actually. And already, in classic Labour Party style, there's a big bun fight over what's going to happen at the conference, because it's the time of year when they can change the rules. And we all know how much the Labour Party likes to discuss whether or not to change their rules, because it's really important, because it's basically about who's in charge of controlling the party.
And there are a few people who know the rules better than the former Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, who's here now. Hello, John.
Hi.
Do you know what? Before we dive into the Labour Party rulebook, which is always a fun conversation, we've been Labour's talking about this cost of living crisis. I mean, how would you describe the situation that's facing your constituents, or the situation that might be facing them in the next few months?
Pretty tough, really tough, actually. You remember, in my constituency, I've got Heathrow Airport, so we've had a large number of people not working for a long period of time. When the furlough ended, a fair number were laid off as well, so it's been really tough. And now they're even those are not associated with the airport, a lot working in the public sector, so the public sector pay freezes hitting them, energy prices going up, for inflation going up, and for other constituents, they're cutting universal credit is really tough. So I'm worried. We've had a really hard time, and I'm worried that a lot of people are on the edge at the moment under an awful lot of pressure. So yeah, it's hard. It's really hard, and I feel for people at the moment, and we just need more support. We can't. The universal credit cut has got to be halted in some form, and we need to know that soon, because it's put an awful lot of pressure on people.
And what more do you think Labour should be doing as far as this argument is concerned, given it could be one of the big political dividing lines of the coming months?
I think we first of all, to be honest, I think we need to get a bit angrier about what's gone on and the mismanagement of the whole process. The energy prices, not mismanagement. Ed Miliband has come out slugging over the last few days, which is quite good. I'm pleased with that. But we just need to, we need to make sure people know this is a mess created by the government itself on a whole range of fronts. But in addition to that, we just need to be clear about what we're doing, which, in terms of universal credit, we've made it clear the 20 quid shouldn't be cut, but we also should be going much further than that and saying we really do need to have a system where people aren't living in poverty anymore or on the edge of poverty. My view is Johnson's incompetent in terms of basic administration, but when you do push him along, he will seize upon something. He'll claim it for his own. I don't care about that. But when you push them along, you can get some movement, but you have to be both angry and skillful about what you're advocating.
Do you think they're going to shift on universal credit then?
Yeah, they are. They'll do it in some way. It looks as though they'll shift on the taper or something like it. There'll be a face-saving exercise.
Oh, the amount at which universal credit is taken away from you as you earn more.
Yeah, I think it'll be around that. They're going to have to do something on energy as well to assist people. And the reason I'm saying that is, I talk to people in the House of Commons that there's a depth of anxiety on the Tory backbenchers. And, there's a build-up of frustration with Johnson and a bit on Sunak, less on Sunak. He's hiding at the moment, but there's a build-up of anxiety. Some of it in what you depict as the red wall seats. Some of those people that got elected, there's a bit of anger as well, and so I think Johnson will have to move on some of these issues.
Now, John, you talked about that Keir Starmer needs to get angrier to get the government to change position. That's one tactic. What do you think about the tactic of writing an 11,000-word pamphlet for the Fabian Society? Is that a good tactic? What Keir Starmer did.
I described it. I've read it.
Oh, that's good.
All of it.
Well, fair dues. You have to read the thing if he's put it out there. So I described it as the Sermon on the Mount written by focus groups. To be honest, it's not. It doesn't do it for me. I don't think it would convince many people about the Labour Party as a vision.
So, John, do you actually know, though, that this pamphlet has been put together with the help of focus groups? Because it's a great line, but do you actually know that, or are you assuming that from having read it?
I have no idea. But now that Deborah Matheson is head of strategy, she's the focus
prominent
group
pollster,
queen
yes,
yeah, she's the focus group queen from the Blair days, if you remember. So I'm sure there's been a fair amount of involvement. Well, fair enough. It's a technique to be used, but focus groups are techniques to be used about language and how you win an argument. It isn't about how you design your policies.
As ever, though, no one in the Labour Party is really talking about policy at the moment. Actually, the big row before conference is about changing the rules and changing who would be allowed to pick the leader. Keir Starmer's sort of got into a bit of a pickle over this. He's considering whether or not this conference to try to change the rules that got Jeremy Corbyn elected as a Labour leader. You and your colleagues on the left aren't very happy about it. What's that all about?
Well, we could do an argument and a row at this Labour Party conference about our constitution or our rules like a hole in the head, to be honest.
Oh, why are you picking it then?
Well,
or is Keir Starmer picking it? What do you make of him using this moment to do it? And people on the left are picking an argument, aren't they?
I think it's a real mistake to even bring it forward. When Keir's only been elected, 18 months ago? At no time in his candidacy for his campaign to become leader did he raise anything around this, apart from the one thing he said, he'd engage members more, he'd give members more power. So people feel a bit, actually, he's open to charges of dishonesty on this. That's the problem for him. Why didn't he set this out when he stood for leader? Now he's bringing it forward. The last thing he knows this will provoke an argument, and it will be left and right and all the rest. What we need at the moment for this conference is we just do need a bit of unity, and we need to focus on the Tories, and we need to focus on the policy programme. And Keir said we've got to focus outwards, and this is just making us focus inwards again. It's completely I think it's unnecessary.
Why not just ignore it then, John? Because if you ignore it, there isn't a row, and then the party can focus on the outward stuff.
Yeah, it's too important because it means that it undermines the democracy in the party that we've settled on. So it is too important to ignore, and a lot of our members are pretty angry about it. So the best thing, I've said to Keir, the best thing to do on things like this is when we've done things like this in the past, you do a proper consultation. Ed Miliband even had a special conference. You take time over it, and to try and bounce it through 3 days, announcing it 3 days before Labour Party conference, and then to try and bounce it through, people just get frustrated and angry about that. And then you have a row which spoils the first few days of the conference. And also, to be frank, I think even if Keir gets his proposal through, it will cause quite a lot of bitterness. We'll lose more members. We've lost about 150,000 already in the last year.
But John,
more members.
But John,
what I'm saying is it will spill over for the next few months, not just at conference.
And clearly there are people who are really unhappy, and of course they're entitled to be unhappy. But when you and Jeremy Corbyn were running the Labour Party, there were lots of times where people thought, you were going to change the rules. And isn't he entitled?
Actually, didn't you spring at nearly getting rid of Tom Watson as deputy leader while he was in a Chinese restaurant on a Saturday night?
No, that's a very good example. That's the best example you could use. Because part of this is that sometimes it's not the politicians, sometimes it's the apparatchiks, the courtiers that might cause you the problem.
So are you going to go along with trying to get rid of David Evans, the General Secretary of the party?
Wait for it. When it came to the example you just used, that was around them trying to get rid of John Watson. When Jeremy found out about it, he's put his foot down and stopped it. Spoomph, that was it. That's what I'm saying to Keir, you need to do that now.
Oh yeah, because Jeremy Corbyn didn't have enough control of the party, and it stymied him, and he would have benefited from having more control, which is what Keir Starmer's trying to do.
Well, the way you get control is to ensure that you win elections in the party, and that's what Keir's got control of the NEC. Anyway, he's got a majority on the NEC. In terms of these structural arrangements, we were settled about one person, one vote. That was settled by Ed Miliband, and now to raise it again when we're within 18 months of a general election and to have a row over it absolutely pointless. It would have been better for him to say, look, this is what I'm thinking of. Let's have a proper consultation, take a bit of time over it. You most probably would have got a compromise settlement anyway, and people would have been relatively happy. To do it this way has just provoked everybody.
John, there's a bigger thought, though, here, isn't there, which our newscaster, a Labour Party activist, might even be thinking of, which is that you and Jeremy Corbyn led the party into 2 general elections. You lost them both. You lost the last one, biggest defeat in terms of parliamentary seats since, 1935. What do you say to people who might just say, look, the best thing you could do for the Labour Party is just disappear off into retirement?
Actually, sometimes you can provide advice and assistance because you've been through that experience, and that's what I've tried to do. When Keir got elected, and both Jeremy and I, we agreed, look, when Keir becomes the leader, because towards the end of his campaign it was fairly obvious, we said, what we won't allow to happen to him what happened to us once Jeremy was elected leader. We had the Parliamentary Labour Party, we had people resigning on the day, and then we had coup after coup almost on a monthly basis. And we said that wouldn't happen, and we've treated, well, I've done everything I can to support Keir for this period. I've had a fair amount of flack as a result of it. But sometimes when you get into situations like this, you have to be straight about it. And I just think this is a huge mistake.
Now, John, in the background of this video conferencing shot, there looks like something like a trombone. Have you become a trombonist?
During COVID, I felt I needed something to do and seized the opportunity to learn a new skill. So I decided...
you can show us how you're getting on.
Do you want to give us a go? Give it a go. Give us a blow.
I decided to learn the trombone, and I've done it for about 9 months now, and I'm dreadful. You don't want to put your viewers off.
We do. Are you taking it to conference? Because the Labour conference, the event at the end is everyone always sings the red flag. So, John, you could reveal here that you've been practicing the red flag on your trombone and you're going to take it down to Brighton. You could give us a blast, a preview.
Surprisingly, no one's asked me to play the red flag at the end of conference. Possibly because some people might have heard me already.
John McDonnell, former Chancellor and current trombonist, thank you very much. Shadow Chancellor, I should say. You wish you were Chancellor, but nearly made it. Thanks, John.
Thank you, John. We'll see you in Brighton.
I'm off to do some busking. See you later.
Cheers, John.
Now, of course, Labour isn't the first party conference because the Liberal Democrats had theirs. And it was semi-real and semi-virtual. But Sir Ed Davey was definitely there, and he came on Newscast on the podcast on Monday, and we had a quick chat about insulation.
We insulated well over 1 million homes and by and large had a pretty good record. The government's insulation programmes have been a joke. I mean, you remember, I'm sure, the Green Homes Grant fiasco, which was supposed to be this new, bold part of the COVID recovery. It just fell flat on its face. Hardly anyone took it up. And it's been a disaster.
And of course, they did their favourite gag, which is to have a bunch of people bursting through a blue wall on stage to represent their victory in the Chesham by-election, which they thought showed that the Tories were vulnerable to a yellow surge.
Did he bring his hammer when you did the interview?
Sadly not. Though that tiny hammer that he had.
Yes, I know there was a frantic search to try and find a bigger one. But on the day they thought of doing the photo stunt, and I heard afterwards that they thought, because as a photo op, whether people thought it was cringeworthy or whether they thought it was great, it was a big tick for the first job of a photo op, which is to get noticed.
Yeah.
But there was apparently a bit of anxiety about the size of the hammer, but it was the biggest they could find at short notice.
They could have used John McDonnell's trombone.
Well, anyway, one of the other features of party conferences is everyone getting hammered. So that's all for us.
Speak for yourself, Adam Fleming.
Well, I'll be doing the early shift for the first time ever, so my socialising is going to be tiny. Right, thanks to everyone who's been on Newscast tonight, and thanks to you two for watching and listening. We'll be back with another episode very soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Newscast from the BBC.